Hi, Sally Foley-Lewis back again with another fantastic conversation about self-leadership. And today on the Spark video series, we are joined by Julie Garland McLellan, who is the CEO of the Director's Dilemma. So welcome to the video, Julie.
It's a pleasure to be here, Sally.
Now, Julie and I, in full disclosure, we are speaker buddies. We do travel the speaker circuit. Well, since COVID, a lot around Zoom, but before that, around the world. And I have always admired Julie's work when it comes to working with boards and helping people be board ready and helping boards be better boards. So instead of me trying to work out and explain what you do, how about you tell us what you do?
Thanks, Sally. You were doing a great job there. I work with boards and with individual directors to really help them maximize their impact so they can build the sorts of companies they aspire to lead.
Oh, I love that. Nice tight statement there. That's fantastic. Which is a good segue then into this whole idea of self-leadership. And I'd love to know, sort of twofold, what in your view is self-leadership, and then why is it important for board members to have a good level of self-leadership?
Okay, a two-pronged question to start with. My view of self-leadership is if you can't lead yourself, you really can't claim to be a leader, because the chances of leading anyone else have gone from quite low to absolutely minuscule. So I think self-leadership is the foundation of all leadership, and it's that ability to recognize a situation and step in and change the course of events that separates leaders from other people. And if you can't do that yourself when nobody's watching, the chances of doing it when the stakes are high and everybody's eyes are on you are not so good.
Yeah, I like that distinction. Yeah, definitely. And so I think that sort of lends itself as to why it's important for a board as well. So what are your thoughts? Let's expand that a little bit further around the impact around board members' self-leadership in the context of feeling confident in speaking up or being influential, or even maybe posing a courageous decision.
Yes, and we've seen the examples of directors who ducked the courageous decision to very bad effect. So I think with self-leadership, there's always that choice in the boardroom of, do I contribute or do I not? And once you've made the choice to contribute or not, then there's the choice of, how do I contribute? And whilst you look at some directors and they seem so perfect and so natural, when you talk with them privately outside the boardroom, you find that almost invariably there are conscious decisions going on about what to do. And the first one is the, do I contribute or not? And we sometimes jokingly refer to it as the wait model. Why am I talking? But if the discussion's going where it seems to be needed to go, then jumping in and contributing just so that everybody knows that you're still awake is really a waste of airspace. And board meetings are never long enough. So everyone in the room has to have the ability to lead everyone else when the time is right. But if you're being led in the right direction and you've got nothing substantive to add, the wait is a very good consideration to have. So these directors, they'll read their board packs and their papers, and they'll choose not which items they pay attention to, because legally you have to read every single word of every single board pack, but which ones do they want to contribute to? And they'll come to the meeting with an open mind, not an empty mind. So they've read it, they've thought about it, and they've made a conscious decision that if this goes in the way they see it going, their contribution, other than a few nods and a couple of murmurs of assent is not required. When they think about, okay, I've got to make a contribution on this. This is important, or I can see that management is setting it up in a certain way. That's when all of those other skills come to bear. How do I make my contribution? When do I make it? Do I call the chair and position it so that the chair asks me to contribute as soon as the forum is opened for us to start speaking? Or do I just turn up and blurt it out? Do I wait for the conversation to get to me? Do I bring the conversation to me? What tone of voice do I use? Do I use a question or do I use a statement? And some of the best and most natural directors will have spent an hour or so agonizing over exactly how they make their contribution on those one or two items that are of exciting interest to them on the agenda. So that whole situation, or that give and take of leadership, requires a lot of self-awareness, requires you to be aware of what your colleagues are good at and what you are good at and how those mesh. But it also requires you to know how best to position your contributions.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the open mind, not empty mind. And I think that's so important. And also wait, what a great metaphor, what a great analogy. I mean, I think that asking yourself that, and not just in the boardroom, I think any leader could ask themselves that, you know. I think that's brilliant, and we'll trademark that to you. And
no, don't. I got that one from Ralph Ward. So,
okay, so it's not yours. Okay, right. Thank you, Ralph. So
Ralph, the boardroom insider. Hi, Ralph.
Okay, fantastic. And I think that it's to me, that's a fantastic lesson about for any leader. Who am I when I show up to this meeting, and who am I when I need to put forward my view or put forward the more questions that are needed to be asked, and putting that effort in before you even get to that meeting, I think is so important. We talk about, you know, you and I as professional speakers, so we talk about rehearsing a lot and we talk about stagecraft. We talk about where our hands are. And, you know, now that the pandemic has hit, it's all about down being the lens and where do our hands go now. And we know that. We talk about preparing for a meeting, and yet sometimes there's still not enough time put in and it can go haywire. And I'd love to know your thoughts then, that, you know, with this imaginary board meeting I've got in my head right now, and you've done some work before the meeting, you turn up, you believe you've got your list of questions, you know what points you do want to contribute to, and it doesn't land. What happens then for a board member? Like, where should they be going or looking to sort of recover?
The first question is it important that it didn't land? Mm-hmm. How urgent is the issue? Was it enough that it almost landed and the executives all went, "Oh, unexploded bomb, oops, unexpected ordnance, oops." And even though it didn't quite land, you know that now you've got the executive team thinking and possibly even worrying about the issue. And so it doesn't matter. Or is it something where the board is about to make a decision and you absolutely have to say, "I'm sorry, Mr. Chair or Mrs. Chair, I'm not happy with the way this is going. I'd like to take the conversation back and dive a little more deeply into this particular aspect." Now, most chairs will happily indulge a good director when they make that sort of question, because it's a request, hopefully, that is coming from the right place of, I want to make this organization as successful as it can be. If everyone in the room thinks it's coming from the wrong place, doesn't matter how well you ask, they'll say no. And their thoughts will be based on their previous experience of you. and everything that's happened in getting you to this board meeting. So this is why directors are always on duty and always careful. But if you're not happy, getting that decision halted, amended, staged in its implementation. So, well, let's see what happens between now and the next board meeting. These are the sorts of things that show exemplary leadership. And a very good example of that came into the public domain, so I can actually talk about it, was one of the directors on the board of the Australian Wheat Board. Now, for those of you who have not followed directors' dilemmas, the Australian Wheat Board was the largest briber of the Saddam Hussein regime by an order of 60 in magnitude over and above the second largest sanctions baking organization. So this was a huge, massive international scandal. And when the board first looked at starting to do these transactions, it was brought to the board in papers and described as something called the Tigris Deal. And the Tigris Deal was a way in which the board would increase the cost of overland transport of its product within Iraq in order to recover monies that could then be given to another organization that was dealing with the Saddam Hussein regime, but that was not covered by the humanitarian trade for food agreements that the sanctions allowed. And one of the directors, Mr. Thane, had written in the notes of his board pack, "This stinks," which is quite an unusually succinct and clear and strong observation. Usually you will see something like a little question mark or a star or something just to remind you as you're going through during the meeting, oh yes, I'd considered asking a question if it hasn't already been asked by someone else or answered in the general discussion. I have a question here. For somebody to write something that definite tells you that they absolutely did not want to go past that page without having made a very serious contribution to the discussion. At the end of the meeting, the board agreed to take a step in the direction of trading with Iraq in a way that the sanctions didn't really allow. And it was clear from the minutes that this was not a unanimous decision, which is perfectly good. At the next board meeting, the decision, when they looked at the minutes, the decision, one director asked for the decision to be reviewed, which is kind of unusual. And then there was clearly another discussion. And then it was clearly decided that no, they were going to continue as they'd agreed at the last meeting. And at the end of the meeting, Mr. Thane resigned. Now, that to me is good directorship on a number of levels. Firstly, that he allowed management to use the authority delegated to them by the board in the hope that, having heard the reservations that were discussed, they would find a better way of doing things or a way of managing the risks. Secondly, he'd allowed the other directors to get out of that hot room where everybody's talking and discussing and quietly think. And as a director, you are not just paid for going to board meetings, you're paid for thinking 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year about the things that happen or might happen or could happen. So he allowed them to get out of the crucible and into some clear thinking time. And then he raised the issue again. And then, because as a director, you are jointly and severally liable. So whatever the board decides to do, you can be personally responsible for, even if you didn't agree with the decision. So when it was clear that he was not going to be able to influence the decision, he left the company. And the really interesting thing is that when the eventually, when the court cases were completed, this particular director was not held liable for any share of the money that had inappropriately been given to the regime, or the trade that had inappropriately happened, which in theory he could have been. So it's that question of, when the courts see a director who has diligently tried to do the right thing, and as the Auditor General for South Australia once said, even at the risk of being burdensome to one's colleagues, the judges, the courts, tend to give directors that bit of space for creating the space for thought and good decisions. It's not a one shot and you're done. But if you've had 2 good shots at it, and quite likely a few phone calls in between, then if you can't get it, you're best served by getting off that board.
Yeah.
So it's that whole question of knowing, if I can change it, I should. If I can't change it, I can't sit here as a passive dead weight and undermine or white ant the board, as we say in Australia. I have to, with honor, leave.
Yeah.
And that takes extreme leadership. Yes,
it does. And what you're saying is, particularly in this example, and thank you for sharing that, I think, because it is a classic, a very classic story, and it's been a story that's been around for a while here in Australia, and I think it gives us a lot of lessons. And that particular director acted in accordance with his values. And he acted in accordance with what I like to say with self-leadership, and this is something that's a model that I'm working on, is he's got the blend of his values, his voice, and his visibility. And so he was very clear about his values. This stinks. I mean, that's a clear value indicator. Might not always
a judgmental statement, isn't it?
yes. And so, and as you said just then, so he put the question up. It's obvious it wasn't a unanimous vote. He's allowed it to go forward. Then he questions it again with his voice, and then with his visibility, he actually resigns. And I think that, it's sometimes we think about visibility as showing up, but actually in this particular case, it's by pulling back and withdrawing and saying you're in the wrong, and at the burden of your other board members. To me, he's actually trying to say we can't do this, and I'm sure he tried to say it a lot, but it fell on deaf ears. And I my hat's off to him for staying within his values, because there could have been a lot of pressure to bear to put up and shut up.
Oh, I'm sure there would have been, even if the other directors were not bringing it, just the kudos of being a director on that board at that time, to turn your back and say, this is the most wonderful thing, and I'm going to say no because my values will not allow it, was courageous.
Yeah, it's a prestigious board made not so prestigious.
Not so prestigious anymore, even though it's changed its name.
Yeah. That is such a fantastic example. Thanks, Julie. So, how would you suggest board members tap into their self-leadership as a means of making sure that they have a successful directorship?
I think the first thing is, before you take the directorship, and a lot of boards talk about succession plans, and they like, these are the skills we need, we'll get them, and then when we've used up some, we'll chuck this director out and we'll bring in some more skills and we'll use them, and then we'll chuck that director out and we'll bring it. And that is just the most disgusting way to treat human beings. We are not disposable components of a plug and play type IT setup. So I talk about progression planning. And when you join a board, or when you're thinking about joining a board, having a conversation, a very honest and open conversation about, I have these skills and contributions that I would like to make to your board, are they valuable to you? And this is, I think, the time over which those contributions will be of value. And at the end of this time, this is what I will have gained from being on your board. And these are the places where I would aspire to go next. And then it allows the company to say, well, that's great, because if that's where you aspire to go, these are the people we can introduce you to. This is the sort of profile we can give you. These are some of the experiences. And really what you're doing is you're sort of negotiating as you join what you would like them to be saying about you as you leave, and where you would like to be going as you leave. And when I find organizations that have done this, people look back on them fondly. They recommend other directors, oh, apply for that board. That's a great place for you. You'll be happy there. You'll be able to make a contribution. But they also retain that rich network. And the best directors, they're self-leaders, but you can't be a leader all by yourself. You can only be a leader if somebody follows you. I mean, it's just obvious. So they have this network of influential followers whom they can follow when they need a leader on any given topic at any given time, and who will follow them when they are evidencing leadership. And so you see these people who are immensely influential. I'm just thinking of a name. Perhaps, have you heard of Ronnie Khan?
Yes.
From Oz Harvest.
Oh, yes.
Tremendous influence.
Yes.
Way, way beyond her natural sphere, way beyond her direct connections. And it's that influence that comes from those lived values, that congruence, but also that respectful dealing with the people that she has worked with on her way through and the people she still works with. And that, I think, for me, is the sort of leadership to which I certainly aspire, and the sort of leadership that I think works well in a board situation.
Yeah, I love that. I love that progression planning and helping an organization really. It's a 180 on the way in which they approach, the board structure and or the offering to a board, and it's a value exchange. Then it's a true value exchange. You're getting a director who has XYZ experience and expertise in exchange for the networking, the profile, the legacy piece that goes with it. So I think that's a model that would work not just on boards. It's a model that could work anywhere. So, in exchange for my work as a manager in your organization, you're going to, this is what I would like to bring, and this is how I'd like to aspire to be, and the organization might do backflips, but I think.
I think it's funny, isn't it? Yeah. We talk about that right at the beginning of our careers, when we leave university and we go into indentured traineeships, or when we sign up as an apprentice. It's like, stay with me for 4 years, and at the end of that time, you'll be a qualified plumber, my boy. And yet, even though it's so valuable, we leave it behind. And I think that, again, is one of the traits of leadership, is you never truly leave anything or anyone behind.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. I think that's something really worth remembering, that we don't leave anything or anyone behind. Yeah, that's gold. Thank you. So I would love to keep chatting with you for hours and hours and hours. However, we do need to respect time. And I just have one last question for you, and that is, what do you wish you knew about self-leadership before you stepped into a leadership role?
Ooh, I wish I'd known how hard it was and how seriously you have to focus not on being a leader, because that's the external perception, but on living as a leader, which comes from within. And it's that inner core that I just thought, oh, well, you know, everybody's got one. I've got mine. Let's do some stuff here. Let's get some stuff happening. Because I'm all about making an impact and building great companies and changing the world one board at a time. But it had never occurred to me that it wasn't about what I did or even about what I said. It was about who I was. And so the question that I wish I had learned to ask earlier was, who am I being right now? And who do I truly want to be effective right now? And the difference in those two answers, I think, is where the leadership is, because there's always a decision of, do I move to who I think I should be to be truly effective? Or do I say no to this opportunity and be effective somewhere else? Because a leader will always be effective somewhere.
Yes, definitely. I love that. And answering that question, I think sometimes we can ask these sort of questions of ourselves, but we don't spend enough time actually sitting in that question. You know, who am I being, or who do I need to be effective? We can sometimes not give that question enough attention. And so we need to sit long enough in that question to find out what the answers are. You know, is it more skills? Is it more self-awareness? Is it understanding our motivators? Is it emotional intelligence? Is it being able to adjust our level of interpersonal communication skills so we're more confident speaking up? You know, and I think that question is a fantastic question to really start a process for any leader to really, really work on their self-leadership, which then prepares them to lead others. So I love that question. Thank you, Julie.
Oh, thank you, Sally.
Yeah. So any last words, any last thoughts you'd like to share before we sign off on this Spark Self-Leadership video?
Just the fact that anybody watching this video, anybody drawn to this series, if you're drawn to it, it's because you already are a leader. You're possibly not a very effective leader yet, but the fact that this interests you should be telling you that you have that inner core. And it is that question of saying, well, hang on, I am a leader. What sort of leader am I? And where am I going to take that leadership? What's my contribution?
Oh, that is gold. Thank you. And I think that's the open invitation for any leader to really work on their self-leadership. So thank you, Julie Garland McLellan, the CEO of the Director's Dilemma. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sally.
And that's another episode of the Spark Self-Leadership series. I'm Sally Foley-Lewis. Wait, there's going to be more. I can't wait to share it with you. Bye for now.